Hello and welcome to IDBD Painting Hour. I wanted to do a quick tutorial on thinning paints because thinning paints causes some confusion for some people. There's a lot of bad advice. Make the paint like skim milk. Okay. Or 1-to-1 paint and water. That's not what you want. What you want is enough water or whatever thinner you're using, which might not be water. I like to use a lot of medium to make the paint flow. Because after that, any more thin is just going to add transparency, which is useful in some cases, but you want to control that. You want to add transparency when you want transparency, but otherwise, if you don't want it, you thin it only as much as you need to get the flow. So let's demonstrate that. Bloop. Just a nice blob of magenta. Pick it up. Here's my card. Draw the brush. And you can see it's starting to get a little not so good. We'll take some water, paint, and we just go back and forth so we're happy with the consistency. And usually I can eyeball it. Worst comes to worst, you test it and you decide. It's really hard with my camera in the way. See, it almost goes twice as far before it starts running out. So that's essentially what you're looking for. You are just looking to get your paints good enough that they flow, that when you are drawing your brush across the miniature, it is not dragging. You don't feel like you can feel the drag. You don't want it to run, and you don't want it more thin than you need. Just for fun, this guy, this half I painted with normal paint that I brushed out, and this half, kind of see it here, and some of the details are starting to build up. What I did was I didn't unload my brush, because that's the thing. A lot of people think that you need a lot of thinning in order to prevent clogging up details or having that sort of gloopiness, right? So they're like, okay, we need to thin, super thin coats, 50 million coats, but that's okay because we're not going to have gloopiness. But the big thing, the most important thing, is to properly load your brush. So when you're painting, you don't grab a glob of paint like that. Work it into the bristles. There's a lot of advice about not working it too deep into the bristles. Honestly, don't worry about that, right? Wash your brushes after you use, get some brush soap, and you don't have to worry about it. I leave paint in my brush. Like as I'm painting, I keep the same paint in the brush and just add more. It gets in the ferrules. It's not a big deal. I mix paints with my brush, which you're not supposed to do. That works it into the ferrule too. You get to learn how much is too much paint in your brush. And if you have an issue, if you're like, oh, my paint's very thin, I've loaded a ton of it onto my brush, then you go to your paper and you can just unload it and you go, okay, that's coming off pretty nicely, and then off we go painting the miniature. Highlight on that. So that's it. That's thinning paint. It is not as complicated. There is no magic formula. You don't have to go out and buy some skim milk and do some comparisons. You can just see if the paint flows off your brush nicely, and if it doesn't, thin it more until it does. Test it on the model. It's not a big deal. Test it on a piece of card, test it on your skin. It doesn't matter, it's acrylic. Use your nail a little bit better, but it doesn't matter. Just test it, find out the consistency that works, and off you go. But the real trick to not having clogged detail is to unload your brush. Don't have too much paint in your brush. Load it up. This is the belly of the brush. Right about here, you want paint in there. You can see it. I don't know if you can see it, but I can see it. It's green down here because I was using green. And I mean, you can see we got a little bit bent because this is a synthetic brush, but otherwise that stuff washes out if you wash it before it dries. Use brush soap, work it in, take your time. It's fine. Load the belly so that you don't have to be constantly going back and forth, and you're good to go. Just paint and have fun. And this has been Coyote BD. I'm Coyote BD, and this has been Coyote BD's Painting Hour. You can check me out on twitch.tv/Coyote BD. You can also follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/Coyote BD. I post when I go live. I post my images, but the best place to see images is Instagram, I find, because it's a lot easier to kind of follow along. So also check me out on Instagram, which is instagram.com/Tyler.Provic, which, yes, I doxed myself. Oh well. So thank you for watching. This has been Coyote Beatty Paints Miniatures. Keep painting. Have a good night.